Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Katie Lillard, and I'm the Director of Admissions at Wye River Upper School. I know we have some folks that are joining this meetup series that aren't familiar or might be joining for the first time. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our speaker series, which was created to provide education and support to parents of middle schooler and high school students. All of our speakers are experts in their field, and they're offering guidance to help parents raise their kids during this time. And we have more people joining. That's great. So thank you so much for being here. And if you don't know anything about our school, Wye River Upper School is an independent nonprofit high school that changes students' lives who learn differently due to dyslexia, ADHD, executive function needs, anxiety, high functioning autism, and more. Our program provides a well-rounded, rigorous, individualized curriculum that recognizes and develops each student's strengths. Our inclusive and uniquely supportive environment enables students to thrive and grow socially and academically. Our campus is located in Centerville, Maryland. We serve students from 10 different counties in Maryland within a 100-mile radius of the school. So we do have people traveling a pretty good distance to get to our little school in Centerville. Here's a picture of our building. And if you're interested in learning more, you can call this phone number. It's on our website as well. You can ask for Katie, or just anybody who answers the phone will direct your call. But in an effort to continue nurturing the inclusivity within our community, which is really at the core of our mission, and to provide resources for our families, we're welcoming tonight Grace Dolan-Sandrino and her mother, Karen Dolan. Yay! So thank you for coming. And I want to read a little bit of Sage's accomplishments, of which there are very, very many, because we do not take lightly that she is here tonight with us. So Grace Dolan-Sandrino has accomplished more, I think, in her 22 years than most of us will have in a lifetime. She's known most recently for starring in episode 5 of the Disney Plus series, Growing Up, which if you haven't seen, you should check it out. It's great. Where she shares her personal journey and her story of finding words and space to be herself, to leading and creating room for others to do the same. Having transitioned at the age of 13, Sage quickly claimed her place in the world as a trans Afro-Cuban public leader and activist for transgender youth. Sage ignites change through her work with Human Rights Campaign and the National Center for Transgender Equality. She's the producer of National Black Justice Coalition's most recent creative project, which is also really cool, Flower. It's a video interview series that celebrates trans women, made possible through the Monica Roberts Fellowship Award. Sage is the founder and creative director of the Team Mag, which is a digital zine. She also serves on the advisory board of Gucci's CHIME for Change and the National Black Justice Coalition's Black Trans Advisory Board. Sage was named one of the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts inaugural social practice resident artists in 2019. And she was also chosen for the Kennedy Center's 50th anniversary as one of their prestigious Kennedy Center's Next 50. These are 50 change makers that the Kennedy Center chose from the nation that they believe will best carry their mission forward for the next 50 years. Well done, Sage. Also joining us tonight is Karen Dolan, who is a senior fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies. She appears regularly in print and radio regarding issues of domestic poverty and economic policy, as well as gender diversity. Karen is Sage's mother and appears with Sage in Disney Plus's docuseries. So you've got to watch Growing Up. Tonight we have a rare opportunity to hear two perspectives from the same family about the experience of transitioning genders at a young age. And We have allowed a pretty generous portion of tonight's talk, and we can just see how it goes, to open things up for a Q&A. So if you do have questions that come up throughout the talk at any point, please write them in the chat, and we will address those for you when it's time for our open dialogue. So I think that's everything for me. Welcome, Karen and Sage.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Sage. I am a 22-year-old queer and trans creative. I work as the Monica Roberts Fellow at the National Black Justice Coalition, where I lead our creative campaigns for the liberation of Black, queer, and trans folks. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here to talk about, the story of growing up, my experience as a trans young person, as a trans student, and now as a trans young adult. And I'm excited for you all to hear from my mom as well, who is an incredible parent of a trans person, and who was right there alongside me as we figured out what it was going to be like as a trans kid in the school system. I am from Washington, D.C. originally, so I grew up going to middle school right outside of D.C. and then high school in D.C. And I lived in PG and D.C. growing up. So of course, our conversation will be, rooted in the DMV's kind of school system and the differences specifically between Prince George's County and going to, DC public schools and what that change was like. And kind of, I think that the difference between these two school districts, although so close and bordering each other, really articulates kind of the larger reality of what it's like to be a trans kid across the country, and that so many schools are getting it so wrong but happen to be so close to other schools that are getting it so right, and also just the importance of being in the right state, and making sure that if you don't find yourself in the right state, that you're connected with resources in order to change what going to school and seeking medical care looks like. So I'll let my mom give a little more preface, and then we'll kind of jump into the slideshow. And as mentioned, we're going to go through the slideshow pretty quickly and then really hold space for questions, because I think, more than anything in this slideshow, I think that questions are the most important, right? Because my story is just that, it's mine. And for parents and students experiencing this on their own, there's so much more that's specific to your experience that I'd love to, hear about and help in any way that, we can. So Mom, how about, you give your intro?
Thanks, Sage. Welcome, everybody. And I'm glad that this also is being recorded so that other people will be able to watch it later. And for those folks, you can also feel free to send questions if you have any after the recording. And my email address is dolan.kl@gmail.com. And I would just say before we start the slideshow, following on what Sage said, when Sage was coming up, being trans as a child was not recognized anywhere. Things have changed so much, but she was born in 2000. And before she was even 2, she was expressing that she was a girl. And there was virtually no existing support systems, no acknowledgement that children are born transgender, and no expression or understanding of gender diversity whatsoever. So Sage came up in a really different time period. Everything has changed very quickly. And so for that reason, Sage was really a trailblazer in many ways. And we were in Prince George's County. And when she was in middle school and transitioned, we relied on the Human Rights Campaign Welcoming Schools, and that is the first place I would direct anyone to go, welcomingschools.org. It's in the resources in our blog, but that will tell you now it's so much more than it was when SAGE was coming up. It will tell you for educators, for support staff, for parents, for youth. It is so extensive, it's so comprehensive for professional development, for training, for checklists, for legal, what are the legal parameters. So I would encourage everybody to go to welcomingschools.org, whether you're a parent, educator, ally, neighbors, family member, or youth, and please check that out. And at the time, Prince George's County did not have any affirming policies for transgender students. And I wanted to be sure that SAGE was in a high school that would support her. And she is also in the performing arts, and was lucky enough to get into the Duke Ellington School of the Arts. And DC public schools at the time had a very affirming, forward-looking gender affirming policies. Prince George's County now has made that advance. I don't know what it's like in Centerville, but I think that all of Maryland now has adopted some very affirming policies, and that's really important. So that is just the frame that I'll give. And Sage, take it away with your slideshow.
Thank you. So, this is, I hope that everyone can see the screen that is shared. But like my mom mentioned, before, the age of 2, I was really expressive. And right here on the screen is a little picture that I love, that my mom sent to me a few months ago of me just like at this, I think like this was while we were on vacation. And it was like a little kids get together, and I like fashioned myself a little outfit and a little dress. And it was a really safe space to do that. And dressing up, that's like some of my favorite memories growing up. So I knew who I was pretty early on, and I'm really lucky that I had the space to explore that. So yeah, early childhood. I was happy, as many of us are, and I was really unaware, and kind of blissfully ignorant to the, judgment, and the weight of gender binaries. I was really given the space by both of my parents. My mom right here and my dad over here holding me up. I was given the space by both of my parents to be who I was and to play with the toys that I liked, and, just express myself. And that definitely started to change when I started to go to school, and also when my dad and my mom were separated. There was just a lot of introduction of like external opinions and beliefs on gender, both from classmates and their parents and other folks who were being introduced to my life. And, as I ventured out into the world, that happiness and that light sort of began to dim, because I was taught to be afraid of who I was and afraid of sharing who I was. And so I pretty quickly learned that my happiness was something that could bring me harm, and that could cause me to be judged and bullied. And so I, didn't necessarily try to hide who I was, but I wasn't as loud and outgoing as I once was. And this, we broke this up into like a few really large like milestones. So this is kind of going into middle school. I went to a summer camp in between my 7th and 8th grade year of middle school. And a few years before, I had come out as gay, because I thought that was really the only word to express a boy who liked girls' things. And so, I I didn't have any other language. Like the word trans wasn't something that I was even remotely aware of. Um, and even when I kind of did become aware of transness, it was never really in a way that resonated with me, right? So as somebody who works as a director, as a creative, as a photographer, my entire mission is to change the way in which transness and queerness is represented in media, right? And ultimately to change it to a way in which, as trans and queer people, we have opportunities to see ourselves reflected in narratives of joy and happiness and love and celebration, and not, exile and exclusion and harm and assault. And when I was seeing trans characters on television growing up, they were never people who looked like me. And when I say people who look like me, I don't necessarily just mean like mixed trans girls, because, if there was going to be any trans girl of color, she was going to be light skinned like myself in terms of representation. And that was also something that I grew to want to change. But I didn't see girls. I saw a lot of cis men cast as trans women. I saw a lot of cis women cast as trans men. And so I didn't see any representation of transness that really resonated with me in any way that made me, compelled to identify as a trans person. And also, I wasn't compelled to identify as trans in the same way that I wasn't really compelled to identify as gay, right? Because both of those identifications came with harm on screen and off screen. But it was at a summer camp that I met a trans person, the first trans person that I ever met in real life. And she shared with me the language of being trans. And so it was there at the summer camp, and you can see me here. This is the year after going to the first year of summer camp, in front of the same cabin in which, I found out what it was to be trans. And so I finally had the language of being trans. And so when I went back home from summer camp, I said, I finally have something to call myself, and this is definitely who I am. And I have this memory of my mom taking me and my best friend at the time to the Urban Outfitters in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., and, going through the sales rack and going to American Apparel and trying to find the exact same shorts that the trans girl that I met at summer camp had. And getting, a pair of shorts. I think they were like BCBG Maximera or whatever that brand was that was really popular at the time. And I remember the feeling of walking out of the store wearing those shorts. And even at the time, I wasn't necessarily presenting extremely femme. I was beginning to change the clothes that I had, and that was a really affirming experience for me. And that was really the beginning of my trans journey, or kind of almost a return really to being trans, in the way that I expressed myself so openly and honestly when I was younger. So, Mom, your thoughts on early childhood and middle school and beginning of transition?
Yeah, for parents and educators out there, you have to listen to your children. I hear a lot of the right wing, extreme religious talking points that are false, that say that young children don't know who they are. Of course they do. And my daughter, when she was, as we said, she was just a baby, and she insisted that she was a girl, and she started exhibiting all the things traditionally that we think of with girls and boys. She started speaking when she was 6 months old. When I take her to daycare, when she was just a baby, she was 12, 13, 14, 15 months old. She just played with the girls, played with dolls, was in a world of make-believe, and the boys were in another room, playing with trucks and nonverbal. So there's a real stark contrast. And, if you hear somebody say, well, how can a child so young know who they are, know that they're trans, or know that they're, somewhere else on the spectrum, you can ask, well, when did you know that you were a girl, or when did you know that you were a boy? I mean, we don't ask these questions of the gender binary. We only ask it with presentations that scare us or that we're uncomfortable with. And Sage was able to go to some welcoming schools up until middle school, but the problem is that there was no support system. There was no understanding of the gender of gender diversity, and that the binary is a myth. Whereas today that isn't true, and you can see that vicious backlash in Republican states where there's been over 310 pieces of legislation introduced around the country in Republican-led states targeting trans youth. It's one of the most brutal and cruel things happening in our country right now. But we in Maryland don't need to do that. In DC, in some of the Democratic-run states, we need to be sure that from preschool, that students are supported and that we don't bring children into a world of a gender binary, because it's false. It doesn't exist scientifically. That is a convention, and many people do not fall in that convention. So you just want to make sure in your home, in your schools, that you aren't separating people by boys and girls, that you aren't stereotyping what it means to be any particular gender, that you are welcoming of all kinds of families. You're not sending home notices that say, "Dear Mom and Dad." You're talking about family, you're talking about siblings. You're not gendering your language, so that children feel welcome and supported. That's so important. We know that in terms of trauma and in terms of the rest of their lives. It's critically important from the time that they're babies up until they're so-called launched as young adults, that they are absolutely supported in their gender and their sexual orientation and in whatever kinds of ways that they express themselves, that we listen to them, we follow them, and we follow the law. There's federal laws that protect the gender identity, the gender expression, LGBTQ children. Some private schools don't follow that, and as we know, there's legislation against that in religious-run states. But there is a federal law that protects this, and there's guidance, and people should all be aware of it, families and educators and the youth themselves. So listen to children, and if something isn't going the way you know it should in your gut and your instinct, you fight for it. I had to fight for my daughter at a time where there was no support, and it wasn't easy at all. But now there's so much more support. So if I can just leave you with that, then I've done my job for the night.
Yeah, so like my mom mentioned, middle school was not necessarily the most supportive space. And I think that, we all know that middle school is where, things definitely get rough across the board. Whether you're cis, straight, or not, right? Middle schoolers are mean, and that's kind of a universal fact. And so beyond, just being in a middle school environment where the students weren't necessarily kind, the administration and the faculty and the teachers weren't either. And so there was a pretty big lift on our part that we had to do. My lift was deciding to go against the guidance of my teachers and my faculty and transitioning when they said that I couldn't. And my mom was backing me and behind me the whole way, and also, fighting to get policies and protections and curriculum developed and changed in the way that she could, being a parent. It's really important that you all understand how much power and privilege you all hold as being parents and being adults, and that you do really hold the power to change and to influence school cultures and communities in ways that protect your children. And I don't necessarily, think that there's a lot of struggle here at this specific school, right? But you know, it's important because a lot of the times students without the support of their parents will go unheard, and will also be found to have higher rates of suicide, higher rates of depression. Um, our grades will drop. And so there were a lot of things that I faced in terms of difficulties in middle school. I wasn't allowed to use the girls' bathroom. I had to use the nurse's bathroom, which wasn't even located in the middle school. I had to go down 2 flights of stairs across an open courtyard into the end of another school building. And because it took so long to go to the bathroom, my teacher stopped letting me go. And since I couldn't use the bathroom in class, I stopped raising my hand, I stopped talking. And I think I graduated middle school with like a GPA of like 2 point something. Like I graduated with like the lowest possible GPA to leave middle school. And so my mom says that I didn't, but I did. But I definitely struggled a lot in middle school, and I got really bad grades. And I was, you know, critiqued by a lot of my teachers. And I think a lot of people said that I just didn't focus and I didn't try hard enough. And when I would get, you know, incompletes or all of these bad grades, it was kind of just assumed that I wasn't doing enough and I wasn't trying hard enough when I was being taught, you know, by a math teacher that was incredibly homophobic and transphobic. And she was vocal about it. I was being taught by, you know, stand-in teachers, substitute teachers who called me an abomination to God in front of the entire classroom. And I was being harassed by students in front of teachers, and it was just all being excused. And so when I graduated middle school with a bad GPA, that kind of threatened my ability to go on to other schools. Thankfully, I got into a high school that was really great, which is the next segment of our talk. But when I was trying to leave, you know, I was being judged on a grading system that we know is not reflective of how incredible and amazing and talented our young people are, right? Because so many of the curriculums that our children learn from are based on you know, hard skills only, and we don't have full comprehensive curriculums that value and develop our social emotional learning, that in turn will increase our ability to learn and thrive academically. Excuse me, but I was being judged on a system that was already broken, right? But my kind of scores were also being rigged because I didn't have the ability to learn and to excel, because I didn't have a safe learning environment. And so thankfully, we'll go on to the next segment, which was high school. And in high school, I was able to transition from Prince George's County Public Schools to DCPS, and I went to Duke Ellington School for the Performing Arts, Duke Ellington School for the Arts, in DC, which is an art school, and there were so many more queer students, of course, there. But again, I was the first trans student at the school. And so there was a bit of a learning curve, but not nearly as much that we experienced at the last school. And this school was really open to learning. And so before I even started school, my name wasn't legally changed. My name didn't get legally changed, I believe, until my junior year of high school. And all the way up until my junior year of high school, I was able to use my chosen name on my school documents, on my school ID, on my report card, you name it. I was never, the wrong name was never used. I was never misgendered by teachers, and I was allowed to use the girls' bathroom. And so that's not to say that high school was smooth and went off without, you know, any issues. You know, I definitely struggled in school as well. And that's because for a long time, I went with, you know, an unrecognized need for an individualized education plan. So I didn't have an IEP again until my junior year in high school. And so since that was unnoticed, because we know that, you know, learning differences are far less, you know, unrecognized and go far more undiagnosed in girls, and specifically women and girls of color, and of course, women and girls of color who are queer and trans, right? So like my individual education plan wasn't put into action until I was in my junior year. And so that was 2 years of high school that I went without those necessary accommodations, right? Without being able to test in another room, without being able to have somebody who, was trained in providing me with the accommodations and learning environment that I needed. And so there were a lot of, difficulties that I had, in education at every single step, but it got easier and safer with the more protections and understanding around and acceptance of my gender identity. And so going to high school and being able to be myself, being able to be Sage was invaluable, right? That was incredible for me, and it was ultimately life-changing and life-saving. And so in high school is when I began to become more publicly involved in the work that I began doing in middle school, which was that policy and student organization and advocacy and activism. And also when I began to partner my passion for the arts with my passion for change making and social justice. And so um, here on the left is a picture of me, which was like used in one of my first Teen Vogue articles. And then on the right is an image that was taken at um, one of my first, one of my first photo shoots for my creative zine and digital studio team. And so in high school, I really began to find my voice more publicly and was really equipped with the community and resources um, and safety that I needed to really be my full authentic self. So mom, some more stuff on high school, and then we'll get to life now, and then we'll move on to questions.
Well, I know that there are 13 questions. So I think it would be, I'm not going to take up any more time because I want to leave time for us to answer the questions. So Sage, if you want to say the rest of what you want to say and lead us into questions, that would be awesome.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah. Okay. So now this is my life now. Um, I work in New York City and live in New York City. And I work full time as a creative and a director. And I'm really happy to lead a happy and healthy life surrounded by friends and loving community. Um, and this wouldn't be possible without the support of my loved ones and the support of my mom and the support of, understanding and loving community members and good teachers, right? And so we know that we spend so much more time with our teachers than we do with our family. And I'm speaking from a student's perspective. And so when you send your kid to school every day to spend more time than they really honestly get to spend with the family at home, you want to make sure that they're in good hands, and you want to make sure that the people who they're surrounded by are there to protect them, are there to show up for them, are there to take care of them, and ultimately love and celebrate them, right? And I think that love and celebration is something that is too often absent from the act of teaching, right? And that there's really no sort of development, and there's no sort of quality development of a young person that can take place in the absence of love. And love is acceptance, love is celebration, and love is the will to to create an environment in which someone can thrive. And thriving is qualified by the ability to have community, the access to resource, um abundance, having abundance of resource, having an abundance of community, having an abundance of celebration, having an abundance of joy, and also having your basic necessities met. And so um I think that, I've done a lot of work in education reform. And I was really lucky to be part of like the 12 students that worked with the Obama administration and then Secretary of Education Arne Duncan to create the bathroom protections for trans students, that was then overturned by the Trump administration. And then I was the person who sat down with Betsy DeVos to discuss that overturning, which ultimately she, she's Betsy DeVos. She didn't do anything about it. But like I'm lucky that I was able to engage in the, political and educational reform necessary to, kind of play my role in bringing the current education climate for trans students to where it is today. But there's so much more work to be done. And I want all of the trans students who are watching this and all of the families to know that I'm still doing my part, and there's still so much work to be done, but work begins at home. And it begins by loving and celebrating your children unconditionally and seeing them for exactly who they are, and not wanting to change any of that. And the only thing that should really be changed is the circumstances in which they get to be themselves, right? And so then that continues on into school. And then when we start to change schools, then we start to change the world. And then, we just have more healthy, happy, and whole kids. And that's really, honestly, the best way to move forward. So that's where we are now. Like my mom mentioned, apparently there are 13 questions. So it would be great to get into answering those questions. And I hope that you all have enjoyed what I prepared so far. And I hope that we, have been helpful and that, getting into answering these questions will be helpful as well. So let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. All right, so we'll start with a meaty one. How do you know if you're trans? What if you are a very masculine female or a very feminine male? Social media says a lot about trans identity, but how does a person know?
Yeah, I think that it's a big question, right? And it can be super confusing, and it can be super complex, and it can be super hard to answer. But I think that the answer is really simple, right? You're trans because you say so. And I think that when it comes to asking these questions, right, usually if you're asking a question, you might already know the answer, right? And I think that, there is also no rush to come to any sort of consensus. And that what I like to say is that I'm not transitioned, right? I live my life in transition. And so the journey of being a trans person is a journey that never ends. It only begins, right? And so I've gone through a lot of changes with my gender identity and my sexuality. Um, and I don't even like to think of them as changes, but necessarily just moments of realization, right? And so there are going to be so that you have the rest of your life to figure out who you are. And I think the joy is that you might never really figure it out completely, but you'll continue having these moments of realization. And so when you realize that you're not the person who you've been told to be, right? The most important thing to do then is to celebrate that and to sit in that, right? And it's not required that you then make another decision or that you then assign yourself another label, right? But that you start seeking what makes you happy and that you start following your joy, right? And something that I say in the show is that if you follow your joy, you will find the community that loves you as you are. And so there's no question, there's no answer really to the question of how do you know if you're trans. You just, start to realize more and more about yourself. But I know that that might seem like a really loose answer. But again, I'll say you're trans because you say you are. And also, when we start breaking down the binary and we start like really understanding, right, that gender exists on a spectrum, there are still folks who identify as binary individuals, right? And so just because gender is not specifically gender is not exclusively a binary, right? It doesn't mean that there aren't still folks who were assigned female at birth who identify as female, and that there weren't folks who were assigned male at birth who identify as male. And it doesn't mean that there are only people who are assigned male at birth who only identify as female and vice versa, right? And that just because you were assigned female at birth, but you like things that are masculine and you like presenting as masculine, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a trans man, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be non-binary, right? Part of deconstructing the binary and these understandings that we have about gender is that, right, if you are a woman and you say that you're a woman, if you are a girl and you say you are a girl and you are comfortable in that and you love being a girl, right, you get to decide what girlhood looks like for you, right? And that might be shopping in the boys section, and it might be wearing flannels, and it might be wearing button downs, and it might be adding a tie, you know, and it might be wearing, you know, boot cut jeans. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is for you is what it is for you. And there's no one way to be a girl. There's no one way to be a boy. There's no one way to be trans, right? And so the most important thing is that you follow your joy and you inhabit yourself as you want to. And you use whatever label you feel called to. But the most important thing is that there's not just one way to be a boy. There's not one way to be a girl. There's not one way to be anything. So just find what works for you and call yourself what you like.
Great, thank you so much. We have a question about life after high school for
Yeah.
trans kids. How does life look different on the other side of high school?
Yeah, life looks a lot better. You know, high school was better than middle school, and college is better than high school, and post-college is better than college. I am on leave from college, but I would have graduated this year if I was still in college. And I left because work got really busy, and my career kind of took off, and I was really lucky to be in a space to leave college, but also to have a school to go back to. But I lived the post-college life, and I've, you know, been away from college for 2 years at this point. And life after college is incredibly better than life at college was, and life at college was incredibly better than life in high school. And you really have the freedom to be yourself. If you have the privilege to live on your own, there's so many moments of, realization, and there's so many moments of self-discovery that you'll continue to find at every stage in your life. And those moments, only increase in joy and increase in frequency the older that you get. And so life after high school is incredible. It's amazing. I think there were so many things in high school that just weren't a possibility for me, whether it was dressing the way that I like, and not just because it went against dress code, but because I went to a high school in a town where the only kind of like fashionable store was Urban Outfitters, and I didn't have money to shop at Urban Outfitters, and I didn't have, the flexibility and the ability to just go to H&M and do all of these things. And so after high school, you have, more practical freedom to choose what you do with your time, and to choose what you do with your style and your money. And you have more freedom to be a whole person. And with that freedom comes opportunity to discover yourself. And that's not just being trans, that's being a person, right? That's just what comes with being a human. And so life after high school is amazing, and I can't wait for you all to experience it, and to have those moments of self-discovery and of joy. And I know that for me, personally, like dating was never an option in high school. And one is because I was in high school, and two is because I was queer and I was trans. And so the few people who did date in high school were the popular cis kids, and that wasn't really an option for me. And out, open, queer and trans dating wasn't a thing. And so It was really fun to go to college and to have those experiences. And, life after high school is so much better than you could ever imagine. So just make sure that, you keep working towards that, and that life gets really hard, but know that you have so much to look forward to. So just stick around long enough.
Someone has asked, what are cis kids? What is cis men and cis women?
Yeah, so the term cis is kind of the opposite of the term trans, right? And so when I describe myself as a trans woman, that is because I am a woman of trans experience, right? So I transitioned from the identity of male to the identity of female, right? I transitioned from presenting as male to a gender presentation that aligned with myself on the inside, right? And somebody who is cisgender is not transgender. Somebody who is cisgender identifies as the gender they were assigned at birth, right? And so there's nothing weird about this language, and not saying that the person who asked this question thinks so. I know that there have been, there's discourse online of, well, why do I have to be a cis woman? Why do I have to be a cis man? Why is this cis being used as, a qualifier in front of, why I'm just a woman, right? And so am I as a trans woman, right? But when we're having conversations that address specific lived experiences, it's important to use these scientific terms, right, to qualify exactly what we're talking about. And so, although I fall under the larger category, the political and social category of a woman, right, when we're talking about when we're talking about gender identity, and when we're talking about the experience of being a trans woman, it's important that I use the word trans to qualify the experience of which I'm speaking from, and the context in which I'm speaking, right? And so the same is true for cis people. And so there are trans people and there are cis people. And so it's not necessarily to be confused with another oppressive binary like the gender binary. This is more a celebratory binary, right? That allows us an extra layer of language to celebrate and be really specific with exactly what we're talking about. Because there are differences between being a trans woman and being a cis woman, and being a trans man and being a cis man. And those differences are to be celebrated, right? We don't share every single experience. And it's important that we have language to use to name that, so that we can celebrate those differences and also acknowledge the importance of those differences, while also understanding the similarities that we still hold that unite us.
Great, thank you. Karen, you started to actually talk about this a good deal, but if there's anything else that would answer this question, how parents can best support their questioning child, are there books or groups parents can join to be better advocates for their children?
Sure. Yeah. PFLAG has chapters in every state. For some reason, I forgot to put that on the list of resources with the blog, but I would direct parents toward the blog that we posted on your website. It has a list of resources. Unfortunately, it doesn't have PFLAG, but PFLAG is sort of yeah, if you could add that, that's sort of the first stop for families. And they will have a lot of resources, and they'll have local chapters that you can visit. There are other resources on there as well. I mean, we live in this digital world where you can find, you can just Google any question you have and come up with lots of answers. But if you look at the resources that I put in the blog, I think that that's a good place to start. I would start with PFLAG, and I would start with welcoming schools on the Human Rights Campaign. I put the website to that in the chat, welcomingschools.org, and you can double down right inside of PFLAG and inside of Welcoming Schools on resources for parents. So there's lots of books, but at the very base of it is you're just loving and supporting your child, and you are following their lead. Of course, you're still the parent. You're not allowing them to do anything that's dangerous, for them, but it's your job to make sure that the world isn't dangerous for them, that you are creating a safe space for them at home and making sure that public spaces are also safe for them. And sometimes it may require activism on your part or advocacy on your part, but there is a lot of support out there for you.
I think GLAAD is also a great resource as well. GLAAD has, resources. I was a GLAAD campus ambassador. One of the first media campaigns that I did out of high school was with GLAAD and Dylan Marin on, bullying. GLAAD does a lot of great work in schools, in media, in politics. Also my job, the National Black Justice Coalition, we have a lot of great resources in terms of statistics, also for questions around language. We have a Words Matter and Gender Justice Toolkit. And so that's an entire kind of worksheet or toolkit of language. So describing terms like femme queen and butch queen and trade and a lot of things that are, a lot of terms that are used when having conversations about being queer and trans that you will need definitions on. And there's a lot of things to learn. And that really begins with finding the language to even have those dialogues and to even learn things, is understanding, the language that's being spoken. So yeah, those are some great resources.
Cool, thank you. This is a question from Stephanie. We don't have affinity groups at our school, but is this something we should start if students want a place to gather? If so, who should moderate or support these group meetings?
Yeah, I think that affinity groups are always a great idea for high school. And in at my school, we didn't even necessarily call them affinity groups, but we just had school clubs, right? And so I think it's important to have a space at school where Black students can get together. I think it's important to have a space at school where Latino students can get together, where Asian students can get together, where Native students can get together. I think it's important to have a space at school where kids who are really interested in STEM and robotics can get together, kids who are interested in drama, who are interested in poetry, who are interested in music. And of course, kids who are gay and who are queer and trans can get together, right? I think that having, clubs where kids can find community is always something that is a great opportunity. It's not only a great opportunity to find support and to find friends, but also to build a larger school community that's informed and to build a culture at school that is aware, that's educated, and that's celebratory of our communities, of our differences, and of our similarities. So I think that definitely starting a gender and orientation alliance or a queer student union is a great idea. Obviously, folks who should moderate should be folks who have the lived experience of being queer and trans, right? And so I started the Gender Orientation Alliance at my school, but I think that, queer student union is also a great language to use. I shy away from GSA, which is the Gay Straight Alliance. That was kind of the club and organization school network that was popularized in the early 2000s. I think that the GSA is a pretty binary and non-inclusive kind of language system, right? Gay and straight. I think that there's more than just gay and straight, right? Because there are queer people who are straight, and there are, straight people who are trans, and there are, gay people who are queer, and so and so forth. So I think Gender and Orientation Alliance is a good language, but also just a queer student union. So a space for folks who are queer, and then preferably, if you're going to have, as many schools do, right, having a teacher sponsor. So a teacher or a faculty member who is the sponsor and supervisor of club meetings should also be somebody who is either queer or a pretty educated ally. And their job is in no way to moderate and to lead and to censor conversations, just to make sure that, of course, it's a safe space, and that everything that's going on is safe for all students. But I definitely think it's a space that should be led by students, right? Because they understand what it is to be a queer student better than any of us old people could. So yeah, I think that it's a great thing to start. And I would definitely encourage you all to do so.
If I could just add on to that, a lot of times, so today the GSA is now Gender and Sexuality Alliance. They've kind of changed. They've gotten rid of the Gay Straight Alliance for the reasons that Sage mentioned. But if you look at welcoming schools, there is a way in which your school, which Y River Upper School or any school can get a designation as a welcoming school. And there's a whole checklist and lots of trainings. And one of the things that it includes is having some kind of gender and sexuality alliance or some kind of, like Sage said, gender and orientation affinity group. And they have lots of guidelines and support and connecting you to other groups like that in other schools. And I completely agree with Sage. I think that at the high school level, at least, if not also, I think at the middle school level, that these organizations, these groups, these clubs should be led by students.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, one more. Should everyone have to share their pronouns? What if I just don't want to as passionately as someone else wants to?
Yeah, I think that creating a space in which pronouns are normalized is really important, right? And I think that I'm not sure if the person who asked that question is here, and if they are, it's I don't know if it's a space for a deeper conversation, but I think the question is right, like, why don't you want to share your pronouns? And is it because you haven't figured them out yet? Is it because you are questioning them yourself? Or is it because you don't really understand the importance of sharing pronouns, right? I think that sharing pronouns is something that, of course, I'm passionate of, and I'll get to that in a second, but I don't think it's something that necessarily we have to be passionate about, right? I don't think that we're always super passionate about telling people our names, but in order for us to have authentic connections and to have conversation, right? It's pretty baseline and important, information for someone to know our name, right? And so if somebody doesn't know that my name is Sage, or if I just walk into a room and I start having a conversation, right, somebody's not going to know how to refer to me, and they either might just not say my name at all, which could be weird, or they might come up with a name that isn't mine and I won't know that they're talking to me, right? And so I think that that's why it's important to share pronouns. One, because pronouns are not something that are queer and trans exclusive. We all have pronouns. We all use them, and we all might, use one pronoun, or we might use a group or a set of pronouns, or we might have pronouns that change depending on the day. And if they do, it's important that we have practices that create a culture in which we're able to share that, right? And the other thing is too that when we have a community and a culture that encourages us to share our pronouns, that creates a sense of safety and belonging for students who may use, non-binary pronouns like they, them, or it may create an opportunity for students who are transitioning to reintroduce themselves and to make sure that folks are referring to them with the right pronouns. So let me give you an example, right? If you walk into a space and you don't give your name and you don't give your pronouns, people aren't going to know how to refer to you. And like I said, they might make up a name and they might make up a set of pronouns, and that set of pronouns might not reflect who you are, right? And that could create an argument. It could create an unsafe or uncomfortable situation. And the easy way to bypass all of that is to just say, hi, my name is Sage and I use she, her pronouns, right? It's not something that you have to do every single day with every single person. But when we're going around in class at the beginning of the year, and maybe it's even time for us to have a check-in, right? Halfway through the year to see if anybody's changed their name, to see if anybody's changed their pronouns, right? It allows us to know who we're talking about, how we should be referring to them and what makes them feel most comfortable. Sharing your pronouns is not something that is political. It's not something that is gendered. It's not something that is queer or cis or straight or trans. It's something that is just human, right? And so it's the same thing as sharing your name. It's not something that you have to be incredibly impassioned about, but it's something important so that people know how to refer to you. And most importantly, so you know how to refer to other people.
That's great. Well, I think we're out of time for questions. I have the rest of them here, so I can share those with Karen and Sage. And maybe we can post the answers to the other questions to the meetup forum, or we can send them out within our community as well. But this is such an important conversation, and we're just so grateful that you both were here to help us lead it and continue to deepen that conversation within our community as we move forward from here on out. So thank you everybody for coming. And it looks like Karen shared her email address again in the chat. So please, she says, feel free to send any questions. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Yay, fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you.